The goal of ongoing media, mainly TV shows or movie series in this case, is to encourage people to talk about it, which in turn will encourage more people to watch it. And nothing quite gets people talking like speculation. Coming up with their own ideas of where the plot might go or what'll happen next, or which of the 75 identical men in the latest season of The Bachelor are going to be eliminated. It's always been like this, but has since been massively exacerbated by internet culture. I think so anyway. I don't know, I haven't been alive that long. And without sounding like too much of an old person, we genuinely live in a time where pop culture is reported on like it's news. I can't tell you the amount of articles I've come across with full like ending explained or after credit scenes and other ideas they've definitely stolen from Reddit. You know those people you watch movies with that ask you questions about the plot like every 2.5 seconds? I'm pretty sure that's who reads these. Often enough though, I see articles covering fan theories, most commonly being the author's best guess about which obscure Marvel character was in the background of that one scene. Right now I'd say the most popular and common type are prediction theories, where people have a crack at being psychics by preemptively solving mysteries and unresolved plot points. Because I do have to admit, there is something a little bit satisfying about having your predictions come true. Take that, writers. For this video though, I thought it might be fun to have a look at some of the other types of fan theories. So, just for the sake of convenience, I've separated a few of them into different categories just so I can pretend this video has some kind of structure. Fabrication theories, as I hate to call them, are the ones you're probably very tired of hearing about. They've unfortunately become very overdone considering how easy they are to implement, especially because everything just being the work of a coma or a fantasy means that you can just completely sweep under the rug any evidence that contradicts your theory because, you know, it never really happened. Because they basically all go like this.
Number 7. Luigi is dead in Luigi's Mansion. In this level of the GameCube game Luigi's Mansion, we can see a shadow of Luigi that looks like he has hung himself. This is a clear indication that Luigi has been a ghost the whole time.
Thanks, M. Night Shyamalan. Maybe The Simpsons hasn't been real since Homer fell into a coma in a 1993 episode, and the rest has all just been a painfully long and very unfunny dream. Or that the kids in Ed, Edd and Eddy are actually in some kind of purgatory after dying horribly, which is why there are never any adults around. Squall in Final Fantasy VIII never recovered from the injury he sustained at the end of the game's first disc, and the rest of the game is just a dream he's having as he dies. Or that the events of Greece were all just a fantasy because Sandy drowned at the beginning of the movie, heavily supported by the fact that after some serious investigation, detectives managed to discover that cars can't actually do that. Or, get this, that Nemo was just a very annoying fabrication created by Marlin to help him cope with the death of his family. But wait, this one has evidence, because Nemo means nobody in Latin. And you bet I'm not gonna check that. The entirety of Friends was a daydream made up by a homeless, drug-addicted Phoebe. Every Harry Potter movie was just a fantasy conjured up by an abused child who lives under the stairs. Jesus Christ, and some of you guys lighten up. And of course, the most famous one, that the reason Ash Ketchum never ages is because he's been in a coma this entire time and just thinks he's going on adventures.
Omedetou, Sadashi-kun!
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Just saying, I'm a much bigger fan of the idea that Ash is 10 forever because of the ho-oh we saw in the first episode, but that's just between us, okay? All of these are from BuzzFeed, by the way, which I'm sure is not very surprising. Now, I'm definitely not saying there's no good examples of these, but it generally does kind of put a damper on everything to be like, oh yeah, sorry, none of that actually happened because they've been dead for 50 years and your whole childhood is a lie. There's more stupid examples like Rick from The Walking Dead never waking up from his coma since the beginning of the show, or Finn from Adventure Time being in a coma the entire time and the whole show just being his extremely concerning imagination. Or even that you've been in a coma this entire time. Anyway, onto the good ones. Headcanons are ideas that don't necessarily impact the plot, but rather focus around a character's backstory or tidbits of the lore that can improve the overall experience with some additional knowledge. And can even be taken as fact if you ignore enough inconsistencies. One of the most famous ones is the James Bond codename theory, which provides an easy answer to the long-standing question of why James Bond shapeshifts every 4 or so films. Because James Bond isn't his real name, but instead an alias given to multiple MI6 agents across the years. Which may explain why he's always so candid about giving away his name to literally everyone he meets in spite of being an undercover spy. It's because he's actually bragging. This would mean that the James Bond title has a very specific set of requirements for those wanting to take up the mantle. For example, having an affinity for vodka martinis, a consistent tendency to go rogue every 2 seconds, and a love for sexually harassing women. Which is all very fun to think about until you remember that in Skyfall we found out his family name was actually Bond. So, Some say Aladdin takes place in a post-apocalyptic world that reverted to a more primitive state, as evidenced by the genie's constant pop culture references of things that don't exist yet. Even though in the movie the genie says that he can see into the future, but maybe Max in Fury Road isn't the original Mad Max, but instead the feral kid from Mad Max 2, who Mel Gibson Max gave a music box to that the Max in Fury Road also has, which would also explain why he barely speaks. George Miller's a big fan of this one too.
Have you heard of the fan theory surrounding Tom Hardy's Max? No.
Okay, I love this next one. In the 2018 Halloween reboot sequel thing, the whole plot centers around the idea that Michael Myers wants to finish the job he started in the original movie after Laurie was the sole survivor of his rampage. But the theory suggests that in actuality, he doesn't really give a shit about her and is instead just a murderous psychopath who indiscriminately kills anyone in his way. Which would explain why he just mindlessly kills off randoms for the majority of the movie until suddenly remembering Laurie exists at the very end. This one does rely on coincidence a little more than the actual movie does, considering that Michael finds Laurie anyway, but I still think it's a really cool idea that the characters just believe that Michael is fixated on them, when really he's just doing his thing. Here's an actually good one I found on BuzzFeed, which is quickly becoming one of my favorites because of how fucking stupid it is. There is a reason that Tarzan covers himself up despite having the intelligence of your average Twitter user, and it's not just because Disney wanted to spare us the childhood trauma, but actually because because he was embarrassed that his phallus was considerably larger than everyone else's. Because, you know, monkeys have small pee-pee. Another fantastic one from Reddit suggests that Darth Vader's affection for puns is actually very relevant to his name, because Vader means father in German.
Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, director.
So all this time, he's just been making dad jokes. I especially love when fan theories string together evidence of very minor details that really don't matter at all and yet end up making perfect sense. I know I'm going on with these for a really long time, but there's just so many good ones to get through. One of my favorites explains why Mr. Incredible was so easily able to defeat the Omnidroid when he was first attacked in The Incredibles, because it was instead designed to kill Frozone. We know from the movie that Omnidroids learn and adapt from the supers they kill, so it does make sense that it would direct its opponent toward a volcano if it was intended for a super with ice powers. But for Mr. Incredible, it didn't have any proper countermeasures for a foe it wasn't supposed to have. Like, that's completely unnecessary information, but how fucking cool is that? Pun fully intended. Going through some more of my favorites, there's a very fascinating one that puts forward the idea that the Shiver Star level in Kirby 64 is actually a frozen over post-apocalyptic Earth, considering its strange resemblance to it in the level select screen, the eerily similar geography, and the abundance of abandoned factories that take up a majority of the level. There have even been ideas thrown around that the hero spirit from Twilight Princess is actually Link from Ocarina of Time, since they're both left-handed. And as we all know, there are only 2 left-handed people in the entire world. He's now a spirit who died with regret and is nice enough to want to pass on his knowledge to his ancestor, so okay. The truth behind Garfield hating Mondays is because it's when John begins his working week, and so it's really just his way of saying that he misses him. Aww. Some speculate that Wally is the only functioning robot left on Earth because he cannibalized all the other ones in order to survive. Ooh. Pokemon has a bunch of really great ones as well that have significantly more thought put into them than Ash being asleep. Like that Ditto was a failed attempt at cloning Mew, since there's a ton of connections between the two's in-game data. Or of course, the classic theory that you fucking killed Blue's Raticate in the original Pokemon game, since the next place you fight him after the SSN is in the graveyard in Lavender Town, where he conspicuously is now missing a member of his party. Oops. There is no film criticism quite as common and basic as complaining about plot holes, to the point where people have actively gone out of their way to try and explain them. Perhaps the reason Indiana Jones survived the fridge scene in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that everybody loves so much is because he drank from the Holy Grail in the previous movie. Is that even how it works? I don't know, but I like it. A really dark one that I kind of love that's more than a little plausible comes from Shrek, of all places. A theory explains what happened to Lord Farquaad's Kingdom of Duloc ever since the first installment, since it's never seen again in any mainline Shrek movie. Although we do get a look at it in the Halloween special, Scared Shrekless. And, Jesus Christ, what happened here? It can be inferred that following the death of Farquaad, the magical creatures that were terrorized by him for years absolutely eviscerated the place out of revenge, and maybe even slaughtered all of its inhabitants in the process. Which you may think would be pushing it a bit until you see just how much the whole place looks like everybody left in a hurry. Or were horribly murdered. Plus, I mean, this is Shrek. These movies are fucked up. Another I came across on BuzzFeed, which was definitely stolen from somewhere else, suggested the ticket Charlie received in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was intentionally planted there by Wonka himself, with the owner of the candy store being on his payroll and was instructed to pick a deserving child he knew well to receive the final ticket. Which does kind of make sense considering Charlie never actually chose the candy he wanted, but it was instead specifically brought out by the owner. Anyway, while we're on the topic of Willy Wonka, crossover theories are always fun because they let you link together two otherwise unrelated properties, although most of the time they are the result of people taking references a little too seriously. One that doesn't, that is definitely one of the better types of this theory, is the idea that Snowpiercer is a hidden sequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. YouTube channel Rhino Stew suggested in his video that Charlie Bucket eventually grew up to become Wilfred and Snowpiercer, the creator of the entire train, who, much like his predecessor, loves branding everything as obnoxiously as possible. The events of the films were prompted by hidden messages in food, and of course there's the reveal at the end that both Wonka and Wilfred were just searching for a successor for their respective legacies. Or the most damning evidence, that the train has to be operated by children due to the very small spaces that were built. Or perhaps they were built for something else? Look, I'm not doing this one nearly enough justice, but I highly recommend checking out the video for yourself. It is so cool. In the Polar Express, we see that the train has a flux capacitor, which might be evidence that it is in fact the same train as the one from Back to the Future Part 3, meaning that at some point Doc Brown was replaced by a CGI Tom Hanks, who may in fact be played by the actual Tom Hanks in real life. One I'm also particularly fond of is the theory that began circulating around 2017 when the film Life was released, with some people assuming it may have been a secret prequel to Sony's then upcoming Venom movie explaining how the symbiote got to Earth, which makes even more sense considering how the whole thing ended. Unfortunately though, Calvin does not even remotely resemble the Venom symbiote, so thanks for ruining that one, guys. Maybe Mary Poppins and Pennywise are part of the same species, considering their shared abilities and origin and theme of balloons. It's possible Event Horizon is a prequel to the Warhammer 40k franchise, since the lore very frequently feature warp drives that take passengers into a dimension similar to that of Hell. And yes, I looked that up, I don't play this shit. Which is essentially just the entire plot of Event Horizon. Then there's the one that Kevin McAllister from Home Alone grew up to be Jigsaw because they both like traps, and yeah, that one's kind of pushing it a bit. And then of course there's the infamous Pixar theory, that because of some shared Easter eggs across films suggests that every one of their movies takes place in the same universe along a very elongated timeline. And the idea that both humans and Lightning McQueen both existed in the same universe at some point is absolutely horrifying. Unfortunately, outside of these cool ones, these do tend to boil down to character played by actor is also other character played by actor, which are always so boring. Unless we're talking about Sean Connery's character in The Rock also being James Bond, because that one gets a pass. Unfortunately, I do think there is a downside to fan theories that has become especially noticeable as of late, given how popular they are online. When what you read becomes more of an expectation instead of just a fun idea, it can really affect your enjoyment of what you're theorizing about if it doesn't come to fruition. That was true for me with WandaVision this year, since every single fan theory I came across was significantly more interesting than anything that actually happened in the show. They can kind of get your hopes up to impossibly high levels that reasonably can't even be— that's not very high at all. They can kind of get your hopes up to impossibly high levels that reasonably can't ever be met, which I think is where the issue is. You're telling me that the internet ruined something? No way. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. And you thought I forgot. See you later, everyone.